Do you believe everything you read on a turkey label? A new PETA investigation exposes the gap between a Humane Raised certification and reality. GAP would be the Global Animal Partnership. At least one turkey farm has used the certification to hide its animal abuse. Don't be duped by a label. What to know when you see GAP's Humane Raised certification. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, the Global Animal Partnership out of Austin, Texas, started off as an offshoot of Whole Foods, but its business is certifying that the animals you buy to eat are humanely raised. Sometimes they may not be. The GAP certificate is even backed by some animal welfare organizations like HSUS and the ASPCA, but now a PETA Undercover investigation of one GAP-certified company, Plainville Farms in Pennsylvania, has shown the certification to be a sham. Turkeys at Plainville Farms were stomped on, kicked, beaten, and used in simulated sex acts, with supervisors looking on. 13 workers have now been terminated at Plainville Farms. GAP has suspended the certification of Plainville, and turkeys have been pulled from Whole Foods, but not all supermarket chains. The turkeys are still sold at places like Wegmans and Harris Teeter and Publix around the country. Now PETA is taking the videos to Pennsylvania State Police for action based on state animal welfare laws. The videos don't even capture the worst of what went on at Plainville Farms, according to Dan Paden, PETA Vice President for Evidence Analysis. I talked to Dan about the investigation and the gap between the Humane Raised certificate and the reality at Plainville Farms. Paden calls GAP's humane certification a marketing scheme that dupes good people. Here's our conversation about GAP, Plainville Farms, and those heinous acts of animal abuse caught on video on the PETA Podcast. Tell me, where exactly is Plainville Farms? You got someone in there and you've exposed it. Where is Plainville Farms?
So Plainville is based in New Oxford, Pennsylvania, which is down just south of Harrisburg. And they raise and kill turkeys in that part of the state, in south central Pennsylvania. They also have operations in Maryland. Our investigator worked on a turkey catching crew, which goes into these sheds in the middle of the night and loads birds out of the sheds onto trucks to take them to the slaughterhouse in New Oxford. He worked at a total of 10 different farms that spanned 9 different counties, stretching a several-hour radius in southern and central Pennsylvania.
And so the jurisdiction is with the state and the state police.
Exactly. So we submitted our evidence to the state police, which of course has the ability to enforce the anti-cruelty statute everywhere in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And given that this was so pervasive and spread across so many hundreds of miles, a state police agency really is the best one to go to here.
And people might think, well, you went to the state police, but this is a big operation that you have evidence, and we're going to get to the evidence in a second. Wouldn't the feds be involved or interested in what's going on here? Or at least I'm sure that's what the thought is amongst many people who are watching or listening to this. Or they're saying to themselves, we got to crack down on this. No? Where's the Fed oversight here?
There is no Fed oversight here whatsoever. A lot of people do believe that the USDA would have jurisdiction and would be interested in and visiting these farms, and they're not. They're simply not. The Federal Animal Welfare Act, when it defines animal, explicitly exempts, leaves out, omits animals who are raised to be eaten. Also, animals raised to be worn for their so-called fiber are exempt. The USDA's jurisdiction over these turkeys is very limited, and it starts only when the birds who survive months of hell on these farms and hours of transport on an open-sided truck through all weather extremes actually arrive onto the grounds of the slaughterhouse. And even there, these birds are not covered or protected by the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act simply because they don't have 4 feet. Turkeys and chickens, who of course make up something like 98% of all the land animals who are eaten in the US each year, are not required to be rendered insensible or stunned before someone slits their throats, which is the law for pigs, cows, goats, and sheep and 4-footed animals. So the very limited ability for USDA to do anything about this is only at the slaughterhouse. And even then, only the most egregious abuse would get so much as a minimal informal warning from the feds, essentially.
And of course, the laws are limited because if they go before the Congress for approval, you have lobbyists going in saying, let's make this, except for animals that are for food, or except for chickens or turkeys, and so it's very narrow, very limited.
It's very limited, and I think all of it really is born of a mindset that thankfully is very archaic and outdated, and we've moved past. I mean, those of us who care about animals understand and know that a chicken and a turkey are just as capable of suffering as are a pig and a cow and you and me. But the law hasn't caught up. And as you said, yes, these industries are very powerful. They have billions of dollars, and they wield tremendous influence on Capitol Hill.
And so the instances that your investigator uncovered are pretty significant. And it happened over the course of how many days? I mean, tell us about the sample. Tell us about what he found.
Yeah. So in a course of 19 days or so, the investigator worked a total of 11 overnight shifts. And so every single night that he worked at every single one of the farms that he went to, he saw this abuse. He saw men kicking on the birds, stomping these birds, picking them up and throwing them by the neck, by the wing. These are, in the case of Tom's, 40-pound plus birds being picked up by one fragile wing or by their head and neck and hurled. He saw a man beating some of these birds with a metal rod. And the men engaged in some sadistic and sexual mimicry with these animals when they were bored, when the truck was slow to pull away or slow to arrive at the farm. Things quickly went very sour for these animals. One man picked up a hen and shook her up and down repeatedly by her head, and then stuck her body between his legs, and then used her injured neck and head to mimic a sex act that he would have otherwise done on himself. Another man one night drop kicked, actually took a 20-foot running start and launched himself at a group of birds and kicked them on the backside with both of his feet. And then one of his coworkers went and grabbed one of those birds, pulled them out of the flock, pinned her down against the floor. Actually, this was a male, pinned him down against the floor under his knee, and then straddled him, got out his cell phone, started capturing photographs or video for social media as he did this, rode the animal, for lack of a better term, threw his hand up in the air like he was riding a bucking bronco, in essence, and then started thrusting his hips back and forth to mimic raping this turkey. So this was every night this went on, and the supervisors stood by and actively encouraged people to kick these birds, to abuse these birds. they kicked and abused these animals themselves, and they berated our investigator simply because he refused to do this. He wouldn't kick these animals. When he came across a lame or ailing bird who couldn't walk on his or her own, our investigator would pick the animal up and move the animal where the crew wanted the animal to go, rather than haul off and kick him or her like a soccer ball, which was essentially what everyone else did every night.
And so this is continuous. It wasn't an isolated circumstance. It wasn't this happens once in a blue moon. This was almost like a routine thing your investigator saw.
It was, yeah. So he worked with a total of 3 different crews. And he saw everyone that he worked with and every supervisor that he worked with aware of or engaging in this kind of conduct. So this was a night after night occurrence. It happened at the start of the shift, it happened in the middle of the shift, and it happened at the end of the shift. It happened at every single farm that he went to. And in fact, one night, one of the supervisors commented that the farmer whose shed this crew was going to that night had explicitly requested that this crew come to his farm because, in his own words, the other crew, quote unquote, turned the birds into hamburger before they were even on the trucks. And so the understanding there is that what we recorded on video is actually not even the worst of what these crews do to animals for Plainville Farms.
So when you were saying turned to hamburger, meaning essentially beaten the turkeys, and as you said, all the things you described are caught on video.
All that's caught on video, and then you have a farmer suggesting essentially that this is the best that the company has to offer, and that there are far worse things happening, that animals are just being pulverized in the sheds and never even make it onto the truck to be slaughtered, but are just being mercilessly killed in horrible ways right there in the sheds.
And the only reason why this goes on is because it can, or because there's no oversight. The oversight is the supervisor, and the supervisor is clearly acting as a kind of cheerleader.
Yeah, it only goes on because people eat these animals, and it will go on no matter what police do, no matter what Plainville does, no matter what any grocer does. It will go on as long as people eat these animals. One of the supervisors spoke about how this company has to slaughter about 80 to 90,000 turkeys per week, and they only have so many crews and so many nights in which to conduct that slaughter, and that they just simply don't have time to be gentle with these animals, that the job has to be done, and that the only way to get 3,000 turkeys on a truck in a matter of a few hours is to haul off and kick them. Well, one of the positions on the loading crew is actually just called kick. It's named after the abuse that one is expected to dole out to birds passing by that point in the process of herding them from these massive warehouses into a chute, onto a conveyor belt, and then into the trucks that will take them to their deaths.
So people actually think that, well, if we don't do this, we can't get these animals in there in the numbers that we need. I mean, you would think that it sounds like just extraneous abuse, that they could probably do more if they weren't abusing the turkey.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of this has to do with the fact that these birds are bred and born to put on an enormous amount of weight in a very short period of time. They are being slaughtered for their tissue, for their flesh, and so they have been selectively engineered over many generations and many decades to be very heavy, and to reach that weight very, very quickly, far more quickly than they ever would in nature. But their skeletal structure and their heart doesn't keep up with that, and their lungs don't keep up with that. So you, by definition, have animals who are prone to being lame and to being immobile and to just sitting down on a floor, in a dark shed for 3 or 4 months and simply eating and putting on weight. And then you have 8 or 10 individuals suddenly come in, throw the doors open, and start chasing you around. These animals can't walk in many instances. And rather than pick this animal up and put them into a cage, everyone but our investigator resorted to just booting them over and over and over again to drive them forward.
Now, this would be pretty astonishing and would be the headline, but there's more, and that is these are accepted practices and practices that are even given the stamp of approval by a group called GAP. What does GAP stand for?
So GAP is something called the Global Animal Partnership. It's a program that was founded by Whole Foods CEO John Mackey. It is something that PETA actually belonged to when it first started because it looked like it had the possibility and the potential to end some of the worst abuses of animals on certain farms. PETA withdrew from the program very early on because it became clear to us that it was essentially just a marketing scheme and a feel-good program that people and companies would use to excuse going on eating animals in a world where thankfully there are many vegan options, especially for instance at Whole Foods. So Plainville is certified by this Global Animal Partnership, or GAP, as being quote unquote humane. And Plainville, the labels it puts these animals' flesh under when they go for sale at Wegmans or Harris Teeter or Publix, or up until our case, Whole Foods, say that the birds are quote unquote humanely raised. So not only are these animals having cruelty upon cruelty heaped upon them before they're killed for their flesh, but people out there who still eat animals but think they can do so without supporting cruelty to animals are being duped by these labels that really are designed to deceive them.
So this activity that your investigator caught on video that we've been describing here on this podcast, this kind of activity has been stamped with the approval of GAP?
Well, the company and the farms were stamped with the approval of GAP. But I think that displays how useless the GAP program really is. They have a third party go in and audit each farm once every 15 months, and that audit is announced. So if you are raising these animals in your shed, or you are part of the loading crew, you are told once every 15 months that someone's going to come and take a look at you and watch what you do. Now, you'd have to be even more of an idiot than these individuals already have proven themselves to be on this video to not mind your P's and Q's when your auditor is standing there watching. But that's all that it does. And so there's no way that these audits and that this program could ever spot or uncover or address the suffering that PETA has exposed. And this isn't the first time we've exposed clear violations of the GAP standards at one of its producers. In 2015, we investigated a pig farm also in Pennsylvania that supplied Whole Foods with what it called happy meat, and found the same, found that the standards were being violated every single day. And so now the news comes out that GAP has suspended its certification of Plainville. It dropped the pig producer 6 years ago. But every GAP certified farm that PETA has gone to, and now that's 11 different farms, we've uncovered rampant abuse and cruelty. And so what do these standards and what does this program amount to but, in essence, a pat on the back for a producer, and a way for a company or a grocer to go on selling these animals' flesh and deceiving kind people who don't want to support cruelty to animals.
And certainly the farms end up paying Gap something for this service, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So it's a giant distraction. It's unfortunate. It's deceptive. But at the end of the day, it's a distraction because it's giving people a false sense that they can go on eating animals and not supporting cruelty to animals. And there is absolutely no way to do that. Even if you found a farm, and PETA hasn't found one yet, but even if you found a farm where animals were allowed to be themselves and were allowed to engage in every natural behavior that they wanted to and were kept safe, at the end of that life, they're still going to be put on a truck in a terrifying experience and hung upside down and be slashed across the throat. And there is no humane way to do that. And so there is no such thing as humane meat.
And so Gap gets money from these farms. The farms use Gap as a kind of shield, there's a kind of cover, so they can go out to, so they can put it on the carcass of these animals, and people can see it. Oh, it's Gap. It's all right. I feel good. I can eat this. And it's a total lie. It's a total deception.
It is. It's a sham. It's a sham, and well-intentioned people are being misled, and the pockets of the companies that are doing this are being lined handsomely because they are lying to good people who are not yet vegetarian or vegan, but they will be very soon. The more they see that, they know that these claims that are made are really not worth the paper that they take home a dead animal in from the butcher.
So PETA has pulled out from Gap once PETA was part of this thing when, and Whole Foods, you say, still is part of this, or?
Yeah, Whole Foods, I think, still funds it in essence. Gap is headquartered right in Austin, which is where Whole Foods is also based, and so the relationship there is quite cozy. Absolutely.
All right, so Austin, Texas, there they are. In the meantime, other big groups, and you mentioned them all. CIWF it stands for
Compassion in World Farming.
All right, CIWF. You have the ASPCA. We have HSUS. Those are three big groups that are what do they give the stamp of approval to Gap, or are they more involved?
They have representatives on the board of directors for Gap, and Gap refers to all three of those organizations as quote unquote proud partners. That's disconcerting to say the least. Obviously, I think people who care about animals on some level don't want to support egregious cruelty, aren't yet vegetarian or vegan, still eating animals, look at Gap and think, okay, I can go on eating animals and feel slightly less bad about doing it because I'm going to support this label. Then they look and see that these other organizations, HSUS, ASPCA, Compassion in World Farming, are partnering with Gap and sitting on its board and helping steer its priorities and helping support its program and these claims, these certifications. And that's a real disservice to people who care about animals. Why any organization would in 2021 want to be aligned with promoting eating animals, no matter how they're raised or killed, when we have so many vegan options, is unbeknown. It's difficult to conceive why they would want to be aligned with this any longer.
And so what are you calling on consumers, people who see the Gap label, and other people who are just hearing this story? What are you calling on them to do? What kind of action against? It seems like there's a kind of a multiple number of actions. There's actions against these companies that give their backing or their imprimatur on Gap.
Right.
Certainly, you can talk to Plainville Farms, but What are the actions that PETA prescribes here?
The most basic one, of course, is just to take personal responsibility. One of the messages that we're putting out there is that police may file charges. The individuals on this video have reportedly all been terminated now. GAP has suspended the certification for Plainville Farms. So these little things have happened, but ultimately this abuse is going to continue until people stop eating turkeys. And it's up to everyone to take the decent step and just leave these birds off their plate. If they have done that, then I think the next thing they really need to do is to go to Whole Foods and Gap and to ask them to stop selling this big lie, this myth of humane meat. It's a fraudulent idea. It's nothing but a fairy dream, frankly, or a fairy tale. But good people are being duped by it and misled by it. And that's not proper to them as consumers. It's deceitful advertising, and it really should end. And then, going to Plainville and saying, look, it's not simply enough that you've terminated these 13 individuals or whatever the number might be, because you still haven't changed your business practice. You're still going to slaughter 80 to 90,000 of these animals this coming week. The day didn't certainly suddenly get longer than 24 hours, and the week certainly didn't get longer than 7 days. You're still going to kill the same amount of animals in the same amount of time. And you've said it yourself, there's no easy way to do this. There's no gentle way to do this. This abuse is inherent in that. They're going to start recording all of the loading of these birds through body cameras at Plainville. We'd like that video to be live streamed. We'd like consumers to be able to see that on their website. There's no reason for it to be secret. If you really want to be transparent, you really are genuine about ending this abuse, you should open up those doors with that video and stream it.
And then what do you say consumers do to the groups that are really enabling GAP and Whole Foods, groups like HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, the ASPCA, or CIWF?
Yeah.
Well, what should they do? I guess.
Yeah, resign from the board and just, withdraw your names and withdraw the organizations from all support of this program. Those names being affiliated with GAP go a long way in many people's eyes, probably, to believing that it's credible, to believing that somehow it's in the animal's best interest to purchase eggs or flesh or milk from farms like this. And nothing could be further from the truth. And, all three of those organizations recognize they may not promote veganism like PETA does, or to the extent that we do, but they all recognize, the merits of plant-based eating, and that is clearly the most effective way to end abuse of farmed animals.
In the meantime, it sounds like the Plainville Farms got wind that this video is out, and they did take some action. And they terminated the employees. They said you pointed out to the body cam, but they still sell a lot of turkeys, and the turkeys are still going to be processed. It's not going to stop. Yeah. So, and it may be slightly less cruel, but who knows? I mean, it's like a cycle. Something will come up again.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't have the worst luck in hiring these 13 individuals who happen to be the most sadistic, twisted ones they could find. And the reality is that when you put individuals in these sheds in the middle of the night and tell them that their job is to do A, B, and C to get these animals onto the trucks, abuse is going to follow. We've seen it time and again with these chicken and turkey catching crews over the years. We exposed abuse like this in 2008 in West Virginia at a company called Abidjan Turkeys. And here we are 13 years later. The only thing that's changed is the company, the state, and the year, but the abuse is the exact same.
And then, of course, there's the GAP idea where the shield that these companies have used to try to say, hey, we're good guys. PETA is now exposed that the shield is not very shieldy at all. We can see through it.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's flimsy, and I mean, just 1 minute of this footage knocks right through it. Absolutely.
So, Dan, where can people go to take action? I'm sure PETA's got something set up where they can just click on things and everything goes to the right people.
They do. It's very easy. PETA.org/turkeys, and the video is there, and all the action steps are there. All the information is there. Yes.
PETA.org/turkeys. And once again, we're coming up to turkey season.
Yeah, and the birds who will be killed for Thanksgiving are already languishing on the farms, unfortunately, right now. They'll probably be slaughtered very soon and put in the freezer and ready to go. So, if you see this video, if you hear even 30 seconds of what's on this video and don't want to watch it yourself, you should know that it's within your power, to move us one step closer to a world without this abuse by just saying this Thanksgiving and everyone that follows, I'm going to opt for tofurkey or some other turkey roast and not a bird.
Dan Paden, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining the PETA podcast.
Thank you, sir. Likewise.
Dan Paden, PETA's Vice President of Evidence Analysis, on the Plainville Farms case, GAP, and how HSUS and ASPCA and other groups have been used to lend credibility to commercial animal abuse. Let people know the Humanely Raised certification is less than meets the eye. See the video in the show notes or take action at PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of the show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at my writing at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. We're there. You can subscribe to this as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.